how God expects us to, usually in Christianity, we look at everything except finances. We look at every other aspect of our life, but that's the one we don't really look at that much. And because it's always been an interest of mine and ended up being my profession, I thought I would study all of it and be able to, help people understand about scriptures. And again, there's over 2,300 scriptures that refer to wealth and poverty and putting your trust in things other than God, and other than God himself and his son, which is the focus of the whole scriptures. The second biggest topic is money. So it's pretty important. With that being said, I'd promised everybody tonight we would be doing a question and answer session, and I brought Mini-Me here with me, my son Dylan, and y'all all got to see my credentials. I have a master's in business and finance. I have both bachelor's and master's. I have a CFP, which means I'm a certified financial planner. I got all kinds of letters behind my name. That's because I have to take so much continuing education over the years. I just thought I'd take it and stuff that I'd get another letter, and didn't know that I was going to end up 6, 7, 8 things behind my name, but that's what happens when you do this for 40 years. So
the whole alphabet.
Yeah, you get the whole alphabet behind your name. But let me introduce Dylan to some of y'all that don't know him. Dylan is 30 years younger than I am, so he brings a different perspective to this, and he started at the same age I did, 21. He's now 31, so this is his 10th year in this business. And, in the business of managing money. He has a bachelor's degree from Jacksonville State University, just like I do. But he went on, not in favor of what his sister wanted. She wanted him to go to the University of Georgia like she did, but he took a different path and went to the University of Alabama and got a master's degree there. So, didn't follow in his dad's footsteps at LSU or anything. So anyway, long story short, Dylan has a lot of credentials behind his name. Been managing money for 10 years. For the company that I and 3 of my partners started, he was our due diligence guy, which means I flew him all over the country to go look at projects, events, meet all the top brass at all the major firms that you've heard of. It was his job to go make sure everything was up to snuff, as they say. Okay, if we were helping to raise money to build a hotel, he had to go make sure the hotel was being built. Stuff like that. So he's got a lot of experience that a young man his age normally wouldn't have in this business. But with that, that's all I'm going to say about us. But Matt had emailed me a few weeks ago with a few questions that he knew people had, and I'm more than happy to answer some of those. Dylan and I will. But I thought we would start with the very, very basic thing they teach you the first day in finance school. When you take your first finance course, the first thing they talk about. And what would that be, Dylan?
Time value of your money.
Time value of money.
Yep.
What do they teach you the last day of finance class?
Time value of your money.
Time value of your money. And everything centers around that. Most people don't even think about the time value of money. Actually, we had asked Adrian, who's another guy that goes to church here, Adrian Lyles, to sit in, but he's in Thomasville, I think, with his son in baseball or something like that. They were in a state game today, and he had to be down there. But what I'm getting at on time value of money is we don't think about it. And the reason I brought Adrian up is one time he walked into my office and he said, you know, I've figured out there's only so much time on the face of this earth that I have. So much time for my family, so much time for my children, so much time for all the things that I want to do, and so much time to devote to my career and managing money for people. And if it doesn't meet a certain standard or a certain level, then I'm not going to devote time to that. What he was explaining was time value of money. You know, if you're in a career and it doesn't, I mean, you work for a paycheck. You're trading your time for that paycheck, you know. And unfortunately or fortunately, however you look at it, every day of your life, you have to figure out, is this what I'm going to spend my time doing? Is this what I expect to get paid for this? All these things. And so the point we're making and what we'll talk about, and I'll go ahead and define time value of money.
So basically, time value of money is there's all kinds of different statistics that you can use, right? We have statistics on our lives. If you go to the hospital, they can run statistics all the time. Everything can come down to percentages. You can get all in depth to it, right? But kind of like he mentioned, I think it was Monday, he mentioned that we are stewards of money, right? So what does that mean? Meaning that the money itself doesn't really have much value. It's really just paper. And we all kind of know that, we've heard that. But it brings value to it depending on how bad you need it, right? If you're in pretty bad shape and you need $10, well, $10 will go pretty far with you, right? If you got a lot of money and someone offers you $10, you'll say, no, don't worry about it. I got it today. Point of that is that then what ends up going to that next step is the time value of that money. How long does it take you to earn that? How much does it value over time to make that much? Once again, if we talk about sometimes if the CEO of a Fortune 500 company comes in here and his time value of his money to speak for that hour is $12,000 an hour, well, guess what? That's the time value of his money. Most of us have no idea what our time is worth. We can value it in our head and sit there and say, well, I'll go help out this guy, and you know, it's probably not worth my time, but I'll still do it just to be a good person today. It just depends, right? But the time value of that money is kind of the silent killer of that, of how do we know if it's over or above that limit that we want?
Yeah. Basically, the very basic premise is it's better to receive $1 today than it is $1 10 years from now. It's worth more today than it is then. And it'll always be, which goes back to the concept that I said the other night. How do we know that the stock market will be higher in the future? Well, do you expect McDonald's hamburgers to be cheaper? No. Why? Because we know inflation. And what causes inflation? Everything going up. Employees wanting more pay. Everything that goes along with it. Again, we know that it'll be higher, and McDonald's is not in the business of being there because they just love everybody and we're just going to give them free hamburgers all the time. That's not their business. They went into business to make money.
And I'll throw out too, kind of get personal and kind of hit more closer to home too. Think about it this way. Think about what you bought your first car for, right? Okay, what I bought my first car for was not how much he bought his first car for, right? Okay, so at the end of the day, but what's the idea of that is that you always want to go sell something for more than you paid for it. Cars aren't usually the best example of that, but let's trade that out with like a house, right? If he paid $50,000 for his first house, well, guess what? If we want to go get a house for $50,000 today, it's probably burnt down, okay? And insurance claimed it and all that. So
I paid more for cars than I paid for my first house.
Correct.
Now.
And my point to that is that at the end of the day, you always want to sell that for more. And that's a personal at home, right? That's your finances. You don't want to let that go from less than what you paid for it. You might be a charitable person, it might be great, but at the end of the day, I want to sell it for more than I paid for it. Every company is out there doing the same thing.
I've always jokingly said McDonald's is a real estate company that sells hamburgers. Why? Because they sell hamburgers to pay for that real estate that they got, which is normally some of the best real estate in town.
Yep.
You know, we used to jokingly say General Motors was a pension plan that made cars because their pension plan was bigger than their, auto sales and stuff. But I digress. Let's move into. I'm going to ask you the question, first question I wrote down, and that is, what's the difference between saving and investing?
So, let me think of the best way to put this. So, back when I was, he had mentioned, I ended up, whenever I started out and I was about 21, 22, when you get an idea of managing money, guess what? Most people don't trust you at 22 when you don't have it yourself. So I decided to go to Alabama to get a master's degree because I thought that might give me a little bit more credibility. In my mind, it really didn't, but to maybe someone else, it helped me kill time. The reason I bring that up is I did a study while I was there. And I did, basically what ended up happening is that I took that most people end up probably going to work somewhere about 18, right? They either go to work at 18 or 22. There's usually kind of either college or no college in there. So I shot it down the middle at 20, and then I said, you probably work until most time in your 60s. Well, so I cut it a little bit short, decided to make it about 40 years, 20 to 60, right in there. If you pay yourself $400 a month, which I called paying yourself rent, $400 a month, hopefully at 20 years old is a whole lot more than it is once we're getting closer to 60. Well, my point to that is that if you invest that over that time frame, that's 40 years that's working for you. If you stuff it under a mattress and you just save that $400, it's about $183,000, roughly. So $183,000 over 40 years. If you invest that and get about an 8% return on your money, you have about 1.8 million. That's a big disparity. To me, that's a simple example of what the difference does over time and does that value of money. Saving can be good and doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, but the investment part of it is a different vehicle to accelerate and make it work for you.
Saving is typically for shorter term projects.
Yep.
How do you think about risk?
Let me ask you, how do you think about risk? Because I can assure you, Dylan and I think of it differently than you do. I first and foremost think of opportunity risk, which most people don't. They think about the risk of losing my dollar.
Yep.
I'm not worried about losing the dollar. I'm more worried about, is this investment only going to pay me 4 and this one pay me 10?
And the reason I asked, like my wife's not here, she's like terrified.
Yeah. Well, that's because most people, I have learned over my 40-year career that fear comes from not knowing. Once you understand the financial markets, you're not really that afraid of them. You understand they go up and down. I jokingly, and Dylan, when he was a younger child, and even Alexandria, when they were younger, Dylan always, when he was a little guy, he always said, the arrows are green today. That means we get to eat. When the arrows were red, I was always in a bad mood because the market was down. So people judge, they pay attention to the red arrows. They never pay attention to the green arrows. I've just found over my career, I could have 48 days in a row of green arrows, and it went up 2,000 points. And then one day it fell 300. Oh no, it went down 300. Yeah, but it's up 1,700. And they only pay attention to the downside. So that's why I ask about risk.
I'd throw out to what I see with a lot of my clients is defining risk is each individual person here has a completely different risk scale. And you will have a different risk scale inside your own house, and it will change over time. Usually when I meet with people, I jokingly ask them what the retirement looks like for them right now, because just to get them to talk about it. Let's just have a conversation, right? Because obviously I'm not holding you accountable, because guess what? If I asked you what your life looked like at 45 when you were 18 years old, you had no clue. You just said, I got a house, I want a car, whatever, right? You just kind of throw it in there. So it's allowed to change. But what ends up happening with risk is that it's funny because it depends upon what point you're at with it. Some people, if it's 10 grand, and it's kind of like, well, I'll make another 10 grand, so let's go be pretty risky with it. But what ends up happening is that it's kind of funny, and I almost said this, and I almost interrupted your class last night, because what's funny is that sometimes when people are investing, I'll watch them, some of his long-term clients that have been his clients for 30 years, the market has got them to that point. Real estate has got to them that point. Their business has got them to that point. But all of a sudden, once they get to the point of, I guess, no return, right? Like, once it gets to a point of like, okay, well, now I got 2 million. Well, now I'm terrified of the same thing that got us there. We're more
terrified to lose the 2
scared of
million,
losing it.
even though they got to it.
It was right.
There is a capitulation point somewhere around 55 to 62.
Yep.
Somewhere right in there that you revert back to your earlier scared ways, because they've built up a huge amount in their retirement account. Huge is a relative term. Some people 40,000 is a lot, some people 400,000 is a lot, and some people 4 million is a lot. So when I say huge, I'm talking about anybody's own number.
Own definition.
But once you get to that certain point, it's like fear strikes. And I typically get clients to work with me when they're in their 20s or early 30s or late 50s. Why? Because in their 30s and 40s, they're do-it-yourselfers. They know everything. They, can't make any decisions wrong, and
busier.
And they're busy, and everything in the world gets in the way. And then all of a sudden, around 55, it hits, I don't have 30 years left. I've got 5, I got 10, I got 4, whatever the number is. And so that's when you start seeing that. The other point that I see, and American Express, when I worked for them, I was vice president at American Express before I started my own company. And they did a study back in the early 2000s, and somewhere around the $100,000 mark is where people stop being do-it-yourselfers and start asking for a coach. So it's, again, and this is just broad terms, but anyway.
And I don't know if everyone in the back could hear, because we're kind of referencing basically what risk is. I don't know if y'all could hear it back there, but I wanted to make sure that was clear. And I guess my point to it all, to kind of wrap it up, is that with risk, I just want to make sure that everyone knows each one is different, and you're allowed to be okay.
And typically, husband and wife are different.
I was just about to say.
Very rarely we'll find two that, just like opposites attract, typically personalities are different. Everything about them, including their risk tolerance for investments, is typically different.
And what I'll usually ask is, define it for me. Define your risk, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being stuff it under a mattress, 10 being throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Where do you fall in that category? What would you say if you had some money that you wanted to throw in the market? What would you say? You don't like to spend it, right? And so most people fall in that 4 to 6, 5 to 7.
When I was younger, I would, like, if I was looking to make a purchase,
Yep.
I would put what I wanted to purchase, thinking I would walk away.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
I was pretty close to that. In my early 20s, I was a really bad spender, right? It was just it was very impulse. If I saw it and I wanted it there, well, I wanted it when I got home. And turns out, what I ended up realizing was, I was like, well, what if I could just leave that store? If I can just make myself decide, can I just leave the store? And then, well, I go back in there twice for it. And their answer was almost always no. I forgot about it. I didn't know about it when I went in there. I didn't remember it when I left. But man, did I want it when I was in there. I thought it was great. It was really cool. So it kind of along the same line. But yeah.
Let's move on, because that is a question that leads into, how do you start investing? I have that question all the time. And investing in savings is different. Savings is typically, like we said, for a very short thing. We're going on vacation in 12 months, so we're going to save so much for that. Yes, we want that in a safe account that doesn't, fluctuate or anything else. But retirement is not 12 months from now, probably, for most of us. It might be 20, 30 years from now. And that's where you start investing. Why? Because if you put money in a money market or a savings account for 30 years, you are losing money safely. Mm-hmm. Why? Because of the inflation. Inflation and taxes will eat you alive. Yep. If you're not earning 5% on your money, you are backing up. Mm-hmm. Period. So that's why people invest, because you want to get at least 5% or greater on your money. Well, how do you do that when a money market or a CD is paying 2 or 3? Well, the only way you can is go to the financial markets and start investing in things. Well, how do you invest? How do you begin investing? Well, there's typically several different ways. You can open a brokerage account, and that is an account where you can buy and sell all of these types of investments that I'm fixing to ask him kind of to define for us. But you can buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds and ETFs and treasury securities and all kinds of things like that. Some of these things, when I start talking about it, your eyes will roll back in your head and like, oh my goodness, this is, but over time you can learn what those things are. I left out an important one, a mutual fund. A lot of people can start with mutual funds and they can put in 10 or 15 bucks, 25 bucks, and do that a little bit at a time over their lifetime, and you'd be surprised at how big that can become. So I want to move from how do you start investing? Well, you open one of these types of accounts to what are the investments, and that, like, Dylan, define what a stock is.
It's basically the way that I would describe it to most people is a stock shows ownership, right? So if you own your house outright, you own stock in that house, right? So think about it of when you have a mortgage on it. Well, guess what? You only own partial of that house. So, but as you pay it down, your stock increases in that house. Your ownership increases in that house. So a stock is ownership of this company. So if you go and buy 10 shares of Microsoft, well, guess what? You own Microsoft. Now, of course, with Microsoft, they probably have 1 trillion shares, and so therefore your ownership of Microsoft is the front doormat. But at the same time, as Microsoft increases its market share, which is essentially how large that company is, if they go from a $1 trillion company to a $2 trillion company, your 10 shares is now worth, if it was $100, now it's worth 200, right? If they double, you double. And so that's the ownership of that company.
Yeah. The stock represents ownership, period. That's all it is. And a lot of people don't understand it because it's intangible. You can't see it, touch it, or feel it. But the wind's intangible too. You know it's there, and it's real, but you can't touch it, The other question, well, what's a bond? Because people say, well, stocks and bonds and all these. What's a bond? A bond is an obligation. It is a contractual obligation. When you go to the bank and you borrow money to buy a car, you sign a piece of paper that says, I owe you. If you have a bond, in other words, you've put money out there, somebody is giving you a piece of paper, you became the bank all of a sudden. You have loaned them your money, and they say, on this date, I will pay you the principal and interest and all of that back. They typically pay the interest along the way, and then at the end, the maturity date, they pay the principal back. That's a bond. It is a contractual obligation. And the difference between a stock and a bond, to kind of represent it, is a stock you can own, and it can go up in value, it can go down in value based upon whether that company's making money. A bond won't do that. I've never seen a bank that will come back to you and say, oh, you know that interest that you were paying on this loan to us, we had such a good year last year, we're going to cut your interest rate and let you have it. No, they're not going to do it. It is a contractual obligation, period. That's all a bond is. If the federal government has a bond and you got that bond, you have loaned your money to the federal government and they owe you that money back.
They'll never pay you more.
Yeah, and they will never pay you more.
You've never paid anyone that you owe money more than what you owed them,
Yeah.
right? For the most part.
Okay, that's a stock and a bond. And then you'll hear the term mutual fund. Explain a mutual fund.
A mutual fund is mutual, right? So a bunch of us mutually own a fund, meaning a group of shares, of usually stocks and bonds. You can define it as just stocks, just bonds. The point is that it's a majority of them. Think about it kind of like owning a cattle farm, right? Do you want 1 cow or do you want 100? Okay, so if you have 100, you feel safer, right? Because if you lose one and you only got one, okay, that's the whole farm, right? So if you have one stock in it, well then, and you're only invested in one stock, then you're completely subject to McDonald's stock going up and down, right? If that's all you own. Versus if you're in the S&P 500, which is what a lot of things on the internet will tell you, then you own the top 500 largest companies out there, a little bit of share of all of them. That way, at the end of the day, all 500 companies got to go down or up, right? And most likely, every person that's at those companies are working to make more money and to make sure that their house gets paid for and that their kids can go to college, right? So they're going to make sure that company's going the right direction.
Which goes back to the risk question. If you own an individual stock, you have all your money tied up in that one stock. If it goes bankrupt, it's kind of like owning one cow, and the cow dies, you lost the whole investment. But if you own a mutual fund and you got, like he said, the S&P 500, and you got all 500 companies in there, what happens if one of those companies goes bankrupt? I got $4.99 left. What happens if 5 go bankrupt? I still got $495 left. That's what we're talking about, risk. So is there more risk to owning one company than there is 500? Absolutely. But then there's the risk that all of them could go down at the same time. But what's the chance? I tell people all the time, I'm not in the business of possibilities. I'm in the business of probabilities. And I use this as an example. What's the chances of Jesus coming back today? Very possible. But is it probable based on 2,000 years of history? You tell me. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Himself knows, but I don't. But is it possible? Absolutely. Is it probable? Probably not. And the same thing goes with 500 companies going bankrupt on the same day. If that happens, yes, you could lose all your money. But if that happens, we don't have a government anymore either. Because 500 of the largest companies in the world going bankrupt on the same day, we're back to trading chickens and goats.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Do you have a question?
I was like, is there a difference, like
Yeah.
He asked basically what is a drip account, and I'm assuming probably most of you in here don't even know what a drip account is. Do you want to define it, or do you want us to?
Well, I was gonna say, is there a, you know, like if in my fidelity account, like
Yep.
they're buying whole stocks versus,
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, is there there a benefit?
A dividend reinvestment plan, DRIP. We have a lot of acronyms in the financial world, a lot of them. DRIP, dividend reinvestment plan. Okay, that's all it is, and it basically takes the dividend from a stock and reinvests it back in that stock and buys a portion of a share. And once you accumulate one share, then it'll buy a portion, and now you got two, and it just keeps doing that every time it pays a dividend. So is one plan better than the other? Only if one stock is better than the other. So that's what matters.
And I think
Didn't mean to cut you off, but that's,
I didn't really look over some of the questions
Yeah.
beforehand because I kind of like to make it up and give y'all a real answer that I can come up with right off the bat. But I do think that one of them was kind of leading to kind of the different kinds of accounts. And what I would say to kind of transition into that, as far as if one account is better than the other, you'll hear all kinds of accounts out there, right? And I tell my clients every day we have a screen, and some of y'all probably heard me say this. There's a screen, it's usually on CNBC because it has the stocks and the market going across the bottom, right? And I pointed out to them, and I'll look at them and say, that to you is probably might as well be French, it might as well be Greek, and it might as well be Chinese and Mandarin, right? Because it doesn't mean anything to anybody else in here. I have to try to translate that to my clients, just like we're going to try to translate this. And the point of bringing that up is that all of those accounts, when you hear about IRAs, 457s, all these different, just different types of accounts, the only correct one is probably the one you're doing, right? Because it's better to do one than none, right? Because if you overanalyze it and you try to sit there and decide at the end of the day, I'd rather you just do one.
goes back to the, if you analyze it way too much, you'll not do anything.
Yep.
It's better to do something than nothing.
Yep.
But,
Yeah.
and,
Yes.
yeah,
Absolutely. Exactly.
I asked, what's a mutual fund? Well, a newer term that you'll hear is an ETF.
Yep.
What's an ETF? Well, that's an exchange traded fund. That's a mutual fund that trades on an exchange rather than directly or from the company. In the older world, back when I first started, mutual funds, you could buy a mutual fund at 4 o'clock or sell a mutual fund at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was the only time you could do it. Then they came out with exchange traded funds, and that's these mutual funds that trade on a stock exchange, whether that's the NASDAQ or the New York or whatever, and you can trade them like a stock all day long. You can buy and sell even in peaks and valleys within the same day. So they fall out way out there in left field
Yeah.
because they're not under any of those things.
So he was asking about crypto and Bitcoin and stuff like that, and how does that relate to a lot of these other the stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, things like that. And the best way that I would describe that, because that's usually when I come into play, because there's usually, if someone is younger and wanting to know about that kind of stuff, usually my retired clients are not too worried about it, right? They do have, fear of missing out on it, but at the end of the day, they just kind of want to know it exists. But my younger clients want to know, hey, what's the deal with it?
They're still in the lottery business. They're trying to take $10 and make it 10 million.
The best way that
Yeah.
And the best way I can explain it is that the thing about stocks is that when I can only put your money invested into something that I can make it make sense, right? Can I turn around and sit here and show you that, even though the account went down, I can sit there and say, well, but we put your money in Home Depot. Is Home Depot going to have more sales 10 years from now? Most likely, okay? I feel confident in that. So it'll probably go up in value. I can quantify that. I can show you that. Versus with Bitcoin and things like that, it's truly traded on nothing more than if you paid $50,000 for it, you hope I'll pay you 52. And we'll hope he pays 56.
It's the perfect, it's the actual definition of Ponzi.
True.
However,
It does have utility to some degree.
yeah, until you can walk into Walmart and set it down on the counter and pay for something with it, a lot of people don't believe it's real.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I have plenty of clients that have bought Bitcoin and stuff like that. I don't advise them to. They just do it, and I do the transaction for them. But with that being said, I don't know that it's right, wrong, or indifferent. It's just one of those things. And until it becomes a bigger portion of the world, then you're always going to have people.
I throw out it's kind of like with gold and silver, right? You'll hear the commercials, you'll hear friends talk about it, maybe you own a little bit. I throw it into the same category because I had a really good friend that he was completely all up in arms about we all need to go have some gold. And I told him, I said, I understand the principle, I understand all that, but at the end of the day, as an investment, I said, let's say all the markets crash and gold is the only thing left. Well, what happens? Let's go to Walmart, right? And let's see how much groceries we can buy with gold. Walmart's gonna sit there and say, I hope you got some presidents.
Gold coins, maybe.
Yeah.
I give you $1 for that $1 gold coin.
Right.
You know?
They might exchange it for some money, but at the end of the day, so my point to that is that's where that kind of falls into there. And so I define
It's a commodity.
Yes.
And commodities trade based on the value that people believe they are at that very moment in time.
Yes.
Like copper can be lower at one instant and higher that afternoon at a different time. And but it is depending on what you're going to use it for. Are you going to make a copper roof out of it, or are you going to use it in an electrical wire?
Both
They
have
are, you
different
know.
value.
So those kind of things determine the value of them.
Right.
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 And
Right.
until it gets to that, it's hard to advise a client to say, yeah, you need to pile all your money into Bitcoin.
Right.
Because it doesn't exist really. Even though it does, it doesn't. So,
Yeah.
what is diversification, and does it matter?
Diversification, to me, depends upon, once again, it kind of goes back to risk. Everybody has a different level of diversification. Everyone has a different level of risk, right? If you ask Warren Buffett what his version of diversification is, his idea is buying the whole company. You can't own more than 100% of the company. So then, therefore, once he buys 100% of the company, he goes to the next one, right? That's his level of diversification. In our terms of that is that kind of goes back to the whole cattle farm business. At some point, if you have a bunch of cattle, but cattle go down, well, then you're still stuck with cattle prices, right? Do you add goats? Do you add chickens? At what point do you get outside of that realm to kind of make sure that, just in case there's a bad time, how am I making up for lost profits? And in that case, that's where diversification comes in with kind of like mutual funds, ETFs, and like S&P 500, like we talked about. Diversification is like, if McDonald's has a bad time, maybe Home Depot's picking up slack. Coke might be still selling because guess what? I mean, we're probably going to go to the gas station and still buy our $2 Coke at the end of the day. We might go through bad times, but we'll still figure out how to do that, right? We're still going to buy it at the end, when we go down to a restaurant. So my point of that is that certain companies might have a hard time versus certain sectors might pick up slack, and over time, you kind of level that out. And
Diversification, a lot of people think they're diversified sometimes. And like we said, diversification is kind of like owning a cattle farm. If all of your cows die, then yeah, you lost all your investment. If you only have 2 cows and they both die, then yeah, you lost all your investment. But if you got 104 die, you still got 96 left. So that's diversification. The problem with diversification is sometimes we think we're diversified when we're not. You may own 5 different mutual funds, but they all own the same stocks.
All of them on Amazon.
And my point is, I call that diversification. Why? Because you thought you were diversified, but you're not. So, you know, that there's a lot of different things that you look at when it comes to that, but I'm not going to beat that subject up too much because I want to move on to some of the other questions that people have. We're like, well, what's a 401k, a 403b, a 457, you know, a pension plan? What are all these things? Well, again, acronyms in the financial world are easy to come by, hard to explain sometimes. But 401k, do you know where that term comes from? Section 401, paragraph K of the IRS codes.
They don't get creative.
They don't get creative with this stuff. 403b, section 403, paragraph B.
Yep.
I mean, they just don't get real creative with this stuff. But it's a different language, and when people talk about a 401k, actually what it is, it's a defined contribution plan. What does that mean? It's defined by what you put into it. Totally different than a pension plan. The old companies all had pension plans. Those were defined benefit plans. In other words, the benefit was defined because at age 65, here's what you get. Didn't matter how much money they put in it along the way. They were defining a pension, a benefit that you were going to get at age 65, no matter what. The problem with that is a lot of companies kind of underfunded it along the way. And at the end, it was like, how do we make this up? We got to put $10 million into an account and we've only got $1 million. What do we do? So they changed it to a defined contribution. We'll match what you put in. But if you don't put anything in, we're not going to either. It's on your back. So defined contribution is 401k, 403b, 457 plans. A pension plan is a defined benefit plan where you will get a certain benefit no matter what when that time comes. That's the difference between the two. It's probably the simplest, easiest way I can explain it.
And those still get complicated because then
Yeah.
you start getting into all the tricks and each, you know, employer.
And how do you manage them and all that
and
kind
all
of stuff.
that, but that's kind of what I was talking about whenever you mentioned the different types of accounts, right? You can go about them all day, and the best one to do is the one that you're doing, right? Even if it's wrong, at the end of the day, it's still better than none. With those types of accounts, don't want to get into it too much because it'll make our heads hurt. But you get basically a tax break for putting money into those, right? So a lot of times that depends upon how much you make, right? Do you need more of a tax break or do you not? So that's kind of the questions that we kind of go into, and that's where it's so difficult if you don't work into it to know it. So don't feel bad for not knowing the complete ins and outs. But that kind of transfers to what I tell my clients, and kind of what I told you earlier today was the way I explain it is that think about, I try to think of things in ways that we can relate it to. Think about it, the best thing I can relate it to is sports, okay? So a lot of us probably played sports or had kids that played sports or some degree of that. And at the end of the day with sports, there's rules, right? It's very hard to play baseball if you have no idea what a base is, right? It's very difficult to play football if you have no idea what an end zone is, right? So the more that you play the game, the more you figure out the rules to it. Usually you also need a coach to help you, right? Because usually you can go out there and figure out the rules, but you still need a coach to make sure that you're doing it right. And so the reason I bring all that up is because this is no different. It's got rules, and we slowly learn them over time. But guess what? Day one is not going to be your best day, right? You don't just walk out on that field and figure out that you're the best one. Some of us got it, right? Sometimes there's talent involved. For the most part, you figure it out over time, and that's where most of these accounts, and like I said, the best one is the one that you're doing.
Throw out some more terms. IRA, Roth IRA,
Yep.
you know, annuity. What are all those things? People have all those questions all the time. Well, what's an IRA? individual retirement account. Yep. Simple. Most people think it's a CD at the bank. Mm-hmm. No, that's the investment. This is an individual retirement account. You can buy any type of investment you want to within that. You could buy commodities. You could buy stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You name it. You pick your poison, whatever. It's just an account that keeps the taxes off of the account while the money's inside there. It's when you pull the money out that you'll actually pay tax on it. And there's three. If we were in my office and I had a big board, I would draw it. I draw a triangle, and I say on one corner we have non-taxable stuff. What is that? There's only 5 investments in the whole United States that are not taxable. I won't go into all of them, but basically Roth IRA, if you treat it the right way, is one of them. There's another corner of this triangle that is what we call non-qualified. Why? Because that's the government term for it. That means there's no qualifications on it. Your paycheck's one of them. They can't tell you how to spend it. They can tax it, but they can't tell you how to spend it. So there's no qualifications on it. And then there's this other side to the 3-sided triangle that is, if this one's non-qualified, this one is qualified. That's where they put all the qualifications on it. The 401k, the 403b, the 457s, the pensions, the IRAs, the Roths, all of those things have qualifications on them, okay? And dependent upon all those rules, depends on whether when you take the money out, if it falls over there in the tax side or if it goes into the non-tax side. And my point is, you got to know all those rules to play with all these things.
And that's what I was going to throw out, kind of like the sports analogy too, is that each one of those has different rules, and it's kind of like playing a little bit of a different sport. And so the best way that I explain it is kind of related to something that probably all of us have, right? All of us have probably a savings account, right? So that savings account doesn't really have much rules, right? Some banks sit there and say, well, you can only pull out so much, and the idea is to save it. So you don't really do much with it. It's just, but that's the rule that it has. Checking account is just a holder of money, right? Once again, not really much investment to it, but there's not many rules to it. The idea is it's pretty free and clear, and you can work with it. IRAs is just another account. Guess what? Savings account holds money, checking account holds money, IRAs hold money, brokerage accounts hold money. All of them are just placeholders. Yep. There's nothing special about that at all. It's what you can do with it inside of those, and then the rules that are in place around that. And each one has different rules.
To go to one of the questions that Matt had emailed me, which I'm assuming he gathered from different people, but one of the questions is, can I retire early? Well, I don't know, can you? You know, that's every time there's a question like that, the answer is very dependent upon you and what you have already done or what you're going to do and what you call early. Is 55 early compared to 65? Yeah. But is 65 early compared to 75? Yes. So the point is, can you retire early? Let me give you a few little rules. Take your annual expenses that you have right now. Expenses, not income. Take your expenses, multiply it times 25. That'll give you a number. Multiply that number times 4%, which is what we call a very able number to pull out of your account. I'll use very simple math. Your expenses are $40,000 a year. Multiply it times 25. That's $1 million. Okay. 4% of $1 million is 40,000. You can live on 40,000 if you have $1 million. If you're pulling 5% out, that's 50,000. If you're pulling 8% out, that's 80,000. So the point is, depending on how you have it invested, all of those things will depend upon whether you can retire early or not. And nobody has to have $1 million. I got plenty of clients that are retired that aren't even approaching $1 million, but their expenses aren't as much as somebody else either.
And I'll throw out, the 4% rule has been tested over time.
Yeah.
So if you go back, and even back to the Great Depression, and all those horrific times during war times, everything that you've heard of, if you took out and if you invested, and technically if you were retired for the last 100 years somehow, if that was the case, and you took out 4% every year, it's tested, no matter what the situation is, you will still have money over the last 100 years. You wouldn't have run out. So that's the 4% rule, is what is safe, that most likely your account's probably still gonna grow more than that. So if you have $1 million and you pull out 4% to live off of, most likely you probably won't see 900, but it might take you a little bit longer to see 1.1, right? That's where that 4% rule comes in. You can take more, right? At the end of the day, it's your money. You can do whatever you want to with it. You can go spend it at Disney for all I care. But the problem with that is that it's that return on that money.
There are risks to it. Market downturns early, like let's say you retired with $1 million, you pulled 40,000 out, and the market went down 20%. Yeah, that could be a risk in the first year. Yeah, that would be a hole that you'd have to dig out of. But assuming all else being equal, that's not usually the biggest fear out there. One of the other questions that was emailed was, how can I live within my means and still be able to give, save, invest, continue to do everything that I'm doing? Well, there are several rules of thumb, and what we mean by rules of thumb is take it for what it's worth. It's been tested over time. It works. But how well it will work for you depends on how well you adhere to it, kind of thing. Okay? There's the 50-30-20 rule. Okay? That means 50% goes to needs. 50% of your income goes to needs. 10% goes to giving, whatever that is. 20% goes to your financial future, meaning savings and investing. And 20% goes to your wants. Okay? That's the 50-30-20 rule. Then there's one that's called the 70-20-10 rule. Basically the same thing. 70% goes for living expenses, 20% for savings and debt, and 10% for giving. So it just depends on how you want to word it. But the very big key factor for all of that is living within your means. If you don't live within your means, none of it's going to work. And by living within your means, I used the story last night. I had a guy that, and actually Matt called me on it today. He said, I can't believe somebody would, anyway. I have an executive that owns a carpet company, a flooring company, and his income was $50,000 a month. His actual income was much greater than that. His play money was $50,000 a month. Multiply that times 12, that's $600,000 a year. And he could not live on $600,000 a year.
Yep.
And Matt called and he said, how is that possible? I said, well, he wasn't living the same lifestyle that you and I are living. He flew to Vegas a lot. He did lots of stuff in Vegas that probably needed to stay in Vegas. But he spent money on, I think my words were, think of the prodigal son. That's what he was doing, okay? And it was nothing for him to drop 25 grand in a weekend. So yes, you can blow $50,000 a month easy if you got it. But he was blowing more than that, and he was always broke. So my point is, he wasn't living within his means. It doesn't matter what you make, it's what you keep. It's something that Bill and I have always talked about.
And I always throw out, I've never had an issue with someone, I've never had someone even have a problem with staying within their means. And even if it's close, right? Sometimes you get outside of it, but sometimes you save a little bit more. If you get close to that line, you're probably never going to be beat yourself up over it. Because all of us have a true number in our head and kind of know when we should and shouldn't do that and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, everyone's going to be okay with that number. It's once we get past that and we start living, we made 50,000 this year, but now we got a new job and now we got 75,000. Well, we were living off 50, right? And we did pretty good. Did you just go find 25,000 worth of more expenses, or did we save $25,000 more, right? How does that break down for us?
And going back to the other end of that spectrum, Matt, I have a guy that was a firefighter. Never made more than firefighters pay his whole life, but died multi-millionaire.
Yep.
Why? Because he lived within his means. Always did. I mean, I always jokingly said he squeaked when he walked.
I think
you know, because he was
all
so
of our means.
he was so cheap, you know. But my point is, it doesn't matter what you make. It matters how you view it, how you spend it, what you keep of it, and basically, as Christians, God blesses us with it's all His anyway. Going back to what we've talked about the past 2 nights, we're just stewards over it. What does that mean? That's between you and God. I can't define it for you, but I can tell you, you can't outgive God. I know that. You just can't do it. He will bless you. The more you give, the more you're blessed. I've just seen it many times in my life. And I've seen people that'll come to me, how do you avoid financial trouble? Save 10% of everything you make. I've never met anybody that saved that much that had problems financially in their life. It just doesn't. It doesn't calculate, I'm not saying you can't make one big bad move that eliminated everything. Yes, that can happen, but that's a rarity. If you're that stable person that keeps doing it your whole life through, you're going to be that same person your whole life
Consistency
through.
matters.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to what you said the first night was be very intentional with it.
Yep.
As long as you're intentional with it, then you're putting it to work, and it's gonna most likely go down the right path. Even like I said, talking about the right accounts, stuff like that. Even if it wasn't the best account you could have done, at the end of the day, it was intentional and it was better than none, right? And I'll give the example because we just had somebody call in the other day, and it was kind of funny because at the end of the day, once again, it's a completely different world for us because we deal with it every day. But we had a guy called in that had inherited some money, and always the question is that, okay, well, what are we going to do with it, right? They decided that they were going to take it and spend it. And they always kind of, try to give us a rundown of, we're going to go do something, we got something figured out. And my point to that is that we talk about living within your means, and it's such an arbitrary number, right? Because obviously to everyone living within your means is a different number. We can't sit there and give a blanket statement to that. But my point to that is that because that's an arbitrary number, and just going back to the example of like when that guy called in and he wanted all of that, and it just fell out of the sky, and most likely it was going towards a new bass boat. And that's okay. I don't care. Once again, what he goes and does with it, it's none of my business. But my point to bringing that up is that at the end of the day, in your head usually, he had to sit there and give us a spin and a run around because he knew that probably investing it was the right thing to do. That's how his uncle got that money to get to that.
His uncle died with well more than $1 million.
Sure.
And didn't have any children to leave it to. He left it to 9 people, and this guy was one of them. So he was trying to justify why he needed to take this money. No, it's not my money. I don't care what you do with it, But it brings up one of the points I had in the last slide last night, which was estate planning, and the actual verse that I had up there is a wise man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Okay? That's in Proverbs, biblical. But then there's, I'm not sure David, when he wrote that, knew some of the children's children that I know because they're going to, I've seen cases where somebody passes away and I had it happen last year. I'm sorry. It's a story. The guy called me. My brother's about to die. Can I go ahead and get my inheritance? The guy's not even dead yet. Mm-hmm. That's the most bold one I've seen yet. The most prior bold one was a very wealthy guy, passed away, didn't have any children, wasn't married, left it to his 3 siblings. One sibling probably still has it and multiplied it big time. One spent a little bit of it and has some of it. The other one had already bought a bass boat and a new truck and pulled it to the funeral. Okay, so my point is that's just people, that's people. So, but anyway.
And the point of that is that, once again, being intentional, and you kind of have that idea, and you kind of know in your mind, where is that line, right? If you don't have that line, then guess what? Then most of this doesn't make a difference anyway.
Matt, you got a question?
Yeah, I was going to make one comment. Question, I don't think we don't have much, and most people have questions. My comment was, once you improve something, gotta know people are going to take. Gotta spend time. So I remember a few years ago when I realized I hadn't been paying like I should, like I just went to hospital. First thing I did is just start finding people who aren't.
Yeah.
So I could be a lot better further along, but I'm where I am because I started doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing financially. Like, if you grow or if you take care of the level.
Yep.
Don't know anybody who's already at that level. Sorry. So I would just advise wherever you want.
Yep.
Probably know over time. They show them better. People are doing well with you all the time.
Absolutely.
Yep.
My question was, a lot of us could probably just grow in this area if we replace the Netflix page with some kind of. Is there a book or a podcast or anything that people go listen to or read?
Glad you brought that up. I brought several sheets here. One is a podcast called Cash Kids, okay? And that's a podcast that is written by kids, but it's for kids and adults. You can learn a lot from that podcast. The other are 2 books. One of them was required reading. I made Dylan. It's Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a very interesting book. It's moderately fictional, but it's based on some truth. And his father was a PhD, head of the whole education system in Hawaii. But he was poor because he didn't know how to manage money. That was his definition of poor. His rich dad was his best friend's father, who was an entrepreneur who knew how to manage money, and the whole book is about that. The other one is The Richest Man in Babylon. It was written in 1926. It's one of the best books on finance I've ever seen, and you can read it in a day. It's not thick, and it's a non-fiction. It's a fictional book about non-fictional topic. So I've got those 3 on sheets here if you want it, and if I run out of sheets, we'll just go make some copies of them. But it looks like our time is up. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your questions. You probably got more. Ask us in the hall or give us a call, whatever, and we can try to help you with all that. So
Glad to help.
thank you for your time. I didn't get to any of the debt questions, so anyway.
I can take a picture so
Oh,
that people
yeah.
can take.
Yeah. Yeah, if anybody